Joining me now is a longtime supporter of mine and the Benjamin Dixon Show, and now this show is Professor Harvey J. Kaye, who is a historian, sociologist, professor emeritus of democracy and justice studies. And he's also the author of FDR on Democracy, a collection of FDR's greatest writings and speeches. Professor Kaye, there it is.
Let's get it right then.
Good morning, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you in this pandemic?
No, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I've been telling people I was really looking forward to today. And nobody else knows but you and me. But the fact is, I thought it was going to be a week ago. When it turned out I had my weeks off. I thought, oh, damn, I wanted to see Ben last week. But it's good to see you.
It's the pleasure's mine. I've been a long supporter of yours and your work and your writings. Matter of fact, you're one of the first books that I read of yours, Four Freedoms, where you discuss the reality that all of the promises of America are good, but without these additional four freedoms, we can't possibly take advantage of what's supposed to be the American dream. Could you speak on that first book, and then I want to segue into some of the current news?
Oh yeah, sure. No, the Four Freedoms was part of a speech, a State of the Union or annual message to Congress that FDR gave in January of 1941, before the United States entered the war. And its purpose, before I say anything else, is to reassure Americans that if the United States enters the war, we would not abandon the struggles and the programs of the New Deal against the Great Depression of the 1930s. And so he said, basically, he warned Americans that they will attack us. Okay, that was undeniable. But the fact was that we should look forward to a world beyond the war. And he said a world characterized by four fundamental human freedoms. The first was freedom of speech and expression. And the second was freedom of worship or freedom of religion, both of which, of course, are in the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And then he added, and he went further, and this really did excite just about everyone except the Southern Democrats, the white supremacists, and quite a few of the pro-business Northern Republicans. He said, freedom from want and freedom from fear. And these became in essence the slogan of the manifesto of the war effort. And it really did inform the struggles both overseas and at home of the greatest generation in all their diversity. Okay, that's important to realize, in all their diversity.
Freedom from want and freedom from fear. That strikes to the heart of what we do here, because it's like, it is the fact that we are in a state of perpetual want and need. Americans, humans across this globe, chasing after nothing more than survival. And then you couple that with the fact that the majority of this global experience in the global South for Black and brown bodies across the global South is perpetual fear, and fear of our drone strikes. I want to talk about both of those, but the first one I want to talk about is that fear, or that freedom from want. On Tuesday, Senators Tom Cotton and Mitt Romney unveiled the details of their big proposal to increase the minimum wage from $7.25 to $10, not immediately, but by 2025. Under their proposal, this gradual increase in the minimum wage will be taking place across the longevity of COVID. I think that's some of their justification. Romney and Cotton's plan would require all employers to use the E-Verify system. So now, in addition to tying this pittance of an increase of minimum wage from 7 to 10, which is completely unacceptable, and the time frame is even more unacceptable, they're tying it to the xenophobia and the bigotry associated with illegal workers, quote unquote illegal workers. Let's take it in parts here. Speak on the absurdity, because I haven't asked you about it, but I'm sure you agree. This proposal from Tom Cotton and Mitt Romney is just absurd.
It's shameful. Okay, absolutely shameful that they could stand in front of the American people and even talk in those terms. But I also want to say, okay, I do not want to be an apologist for what is going on over on the Democratic side either. The fact is, the Democrats have so much to be ashamed of. The fact that we do not have Medicare for all. The fact that there are still holdouts from the Democratic Senate caucus who oppose almost an immediate pursuance of the $15 minimum wage. So let's go back and let's consider about this $10. It is utterly absurd, okay? Look, you and I both know that the minimum wage, if it had been keeping up with any kind of American standard, would probably be about $22 an hour.
Right.
So 10 isn't even 50% of that. Yeah, that's absurd. And I want to make something clear. You mentioned my relationship historically and intellectually to FDR. For all of his faults and failings, FDR was serious when he meant opposition and transcendence of freedom from want. And when he signed into law in 1933, the National Industrial Recovery Act, which again was a flawed act, nevertheless, he said as he signed this into law, which included a federal minimum wage, he said, no company should be allowed to operate in this country that did not pay a living wage. And that should be the standard by which we move, not a minimum wage. We have to think in terms of a living wage.
Right. I love that framing. And I love the framing because even FDR, he had his shortcomings and his failings, particularly when it came to Black people, the New Deal. We were left out of it in some significant fashions, but it does not change the fact that this is accurate. Freedom from want and freedom from fear, and connecting it to a livable wage, because $10, I mean, quite frankly, what we are trying to get Democrats to do was this at a minimum $15 an hour. That's still not a livable wage because every other expense has increased, right? Worker efficiency and productivity has increased. And you're right. If we kept the minimum wage tied to worker efficiency and productivity, it would be $22, almost $27, according to some estimates. But all of that excess productivity, right? All of that excess wealth that has been generated by the workers across this country has gone to no one else but the top 1%. So the system is working exactly the way they want it to work. My question is how do we respond? How do we respond when they have this system, this government, and the people who run it, the ruling elite, the oligarchs, have a vested interest in keeping us in a perpetual state of want?
Okay, well, I'll start off with one thing, which is going to sound like the old throwback to the days of write your congressman, okay? But I mean it more seriously, and that is this. Look, I see too many contradictions inside the Biden administration. However, one of the things that I was really pleased by was that they did not name Bernie Sanders the Secretary of Labor, or at least that he resisted if they asked, because he is the chair of the Senate Budget Committee. And I see the fact over these years that the squad has grown in numbers. The Democrats are weaker, the squad is stronger. Bernie Sanders is chair of the Budget Committee. My feeling is that whatever else, at a minimum, you write to every member of the squad and you write by email or whatever means to Bernie Sanders, and you tell them that you stand behind them. Bernie Sanders sends out regular messages indicating the degree to which the agenda he had as a candidate is still the agenda he has as the chair of the Budget Committee. That doesn't mean he rules the Senate. What it means is he has a great deal of control over the bills that come out of committee. And the fact is that we have to show our support. But let me say something else, okay? And this is really the key. And I'll get to it, I promise. For 45 years, there has been a class war on working people in this country, pursued by capital, by conservatives, and by neoliberals. That includes both Republicans and Democratic neoliberals. And the fact is that what that class war involved, it went after the benefits achieved, the rights achieved by workers, the rights achieved by people of color, African Americans in particular. We're thinking of voting rights. And last but not least, the assault on women's bodies that we have seen now seriously for 45 years. Okay. Now, having said that, the shame of it is that the Democrats turned their backs for too long on the needs of working people. And honestly, working people, the working class, let's be blunt about it, has not seen a rise in its wages and standard of living since the early 1970s, which is probably further back than you folks were alive, okay? Whereas I was just coming out of college at the time. And if you would ask me in 1971 what I imagined in 1980, I would have imagined national health care, what we know of today as Medicare for all, but national health care. But that class war has gone on for all of these years. And what is astounding is that the Democrats turn their backs on the greatest capital D, Democratic leader and president in American history, and that is Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his legacy, and the legacy of that administration and the legacy of that generation. And in doing so, what they end up debating trivialities about where we go as Americans during campaign season. And in fact, even Bernie, to that extent, failed us by not having walked into the room and turned to them when they said to him, "You're going to bankrupt us, Medicare for all, minimum wage at 50, whatever it was." And he should have said, "You call yourselves Democrats?"
Right.
And he should have metaphorically brought FDR into the room. The fact is that we have got to mobilize. We've got to, and what we need to do is not only organize, we not only need to join a union if it's available. Look, that Amazon development down in Alabama, I mean, a lot of history is going to hang on that vote, right? Yeah. It's also the case that New York State, I don't know if everyone knows, New York State has brought suit against Amazon for its treatment of its warehouse workers. I have a particular interest in that because my daughter is part of the legal team in New York State. She's an assistant attorney general that is pursuing that case. This is a significant moment. I do not know if the Biden administration is up to all of this stuff, but we have got to make sure that Bernie and the squad and others make him up to it. You want to have change? You've got to make Biden the great president that he never imagined himself to be.
Say that again for me. If we want to make change, we have got to mobilize from below, unions, whatever organizations are possible, Black Lives Matter, but they have to come around a joint. You know, I like to think of A. Philip Randolph in these terms. Yeah. A. Philip Randolph in 1926, in the 150th anniversary of American independence, told a gathering of thousands, and he said, "African Americans brought democracy to the South for the first time in Reconstruction. Maybe in the 20th century, we can join in bringing economic democracy to America." And my thinking is, if we can create that kind of united front or popular front, that's exactly what we can do. So what we need, so really it's the case that we need to challenge. I don't want to say go to war with the Biden administration so quickly. That's too much at stake, and I think there's still good reason to be hopeful. We've got to challenge him. We have to make Biden the great president he never imagined himself capable of being. Okay? Right. I love that, because there has to be we cannot reduce our politics to fandoms. Right. And if we do that, then we allow things to happen underneath this administration that we otherwise would lambast a Republican administration for. So and to be quite frank, like I love that position. Right. There is a period of patience that we're trying to provide the Biden administration. But when we start talking about some of these critical issues, the freedom from want, the freedom from fear, there's a problem in this country that transcends both parties. And we have to be really sober about it, because there are a certain level of policies that exist no matter which party is in power. And part of it really falls underneath that fourth freedom, like the freedom from fear. Like, what are we doing as an empire? Because America, the United States of America, is an empire. What are we doing to immigrants? The deportation. Right. We have cages now. They have air conditioning. Right. We continue this military industrial complex and its expansion. So it is help the people understand how, if we do not speak out against everything that we fight against, that we then become complicit because we allow an administration that we help put into power go unaccountable.
Yeah, look, we have voices. And for a start, I mean, it's a fascinating development, as we've seen. I mean, your show in many ways was pioneering. As I mentioned to you before we went on, I asked you how many years ago was that I first came on your show when you were up in Boston. The fact is, there are numerous shows that have emerged. If one had a lot of money and was a progressive, one could go from early morn to late at night listening to progressive shows. But these progressive shows and their audiences need to be reminded that merely listening is not itself a progressive act, that it is essential that people join. There's a key term. Look, when Biden spoke at his inaugural address and he talked about unity, all well and good, you know. I'd like to have heard solidarity, okay? The labor word. Call it unity, call it solidarity. Working people in all of our diversity must figure out a way to come together. My feeling is the foremost vehicle for that is the labor movement. And that's why I place so much stock, is the word perhaps, in that effort down in Alabama. And I can tell you, if that breaks through, I hope that's a spur to efforts all across the country to do the same, because it's going to require that kind of thing. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I've got this sort of historical imagination that works. And I go back to A. Philip Randolph in 1941, when he heard that For Freedom speech. Within 2 weeks, he launched what was called the March on Washington movement. And he planned to bring 10,000 African Americans to D.C. to demand that the defense industries be opened up to greater African American workers. And to make the long story short, FDR, unable to get him to halt the march by way of sending Eleanor to meet with him, invited him to the White House. And in that meeting, he turned to Randolph once they got down to business and said, "How many people are you planning to bring?" And FDR was concerned because, let's not forget, D.C. in 1941 was a segregated city, made segregated, Jim Crow, by Woodrow Wilson during the World War I. Okay, so FDR was concerned about the white police and what the white community might do to black marchers, and he had planned on bringing 10,000. And Randolph looked at him and didn't skip a beat, and he said, "We're going to bring 100,000.
My man.
FDR leans back and he says, "Well, I guess we ought to do something then." And he signed an executive order regarding the opening up of defense industry jobs, and then went on to sign an executive order creating the Fair Employment Practice Commission to make sure it was overseen. And by the way, when he did that, it didn't only help African Americans. African Americans, in some way, were the vanguard in their effort. It opened the door also to people of diverse religions as well, not to be denied. So let's think about this. Okay, let's think about this. When Randolph left that meeting, he actually said to someone, I don't remember if it was Walter White, the head of the NAACP, or a cousin, he said he knew before he got into the room with the Oval Office that FDR was going to do what needed doing. Now, why did he feel that way? Because he said there was no way FDR was going to bring me in and turn me down. The implications would be too great. And he also knew that what FDR was doing was he was creating almost a theatrical moment. So that when he signed that executive order, when the Southern white supremacists came at him, he said, "I had to do it. Had to do it." Okay. They made me do it. Had to do it. Okay. So having said that, I want to say now here we are in the 21st century, right? 21st. And that was 1941. This is 2021, 80 years later. And if Biden hesitates, if Biden fails to go where we need him to go, we have got to see a coalition of labor, maybe with Black Lives Matter folks and others, maybe with maybe Sarah Nelson as the champion of the cause. Let them make the demands, okay, that America's renewal and unity requires the push from below and the action from above. Does that lay it out?
Yeah, no. And you mentioned again what's happening in Alabama, the union movement that's taking place. I believe it's Bessemer, Alabama. We'll be speaking with Christian Smalls in a few moments here to discuss that and his other work with Amazon. But what does it say, though, that we are in this phase where now we knew the problem 80 years ago? Hell, we've known the problem for centuries, but we had a really clear line of understanding what the real problem is in this country. But yet and still, we have found ourselves on the receiving end of big corporations, Amazons, even the digital space, the social media space, Facebook, and the power that they have over consumers, the power that they have over organizing and the ability to crush organizing. What do you say to this idea that solidarity and the moral arc of the universe is long, Dr. King, but it bends towards justice. But over the last 80 years, it has bended towards the rich and the wealthy?
Well, I say this. I mean, it's too easy to become complacent, but it's not just complacency. They had it figured out back in the early 70s. You may have heard of a Lewis Powell memorandum that was authored and delivered to the Chamber of Commerce in 1971, which literally laid out the class war across the board. Similarly, people think this is a conspiracy theory, and it's not. The Trilateral Commission that was organized by David Rockefeller, Zbigniew Brzezinski, issued the Crisis of Democracy report in 1975, and they laid out the similar kind of things. They actually named who needed to be suppressed, essentially. how democracy needed to be suppressed, essentially. And who did he name? He named labor. He named, I think they wrote it up as minorities, the poor who were mobilizing, especially in the wake of King's launching of the Poor People's Movement, the women's movement, university intellectuals, humanities and social science, and the liberal media. They laid out the targets. And through the course of the 70s, we failed to coalesce into this broad coalition that might have at least provided an effective resistance. And they picked us off one by one. Well, the time has come, literally, and this is essential, to create that broad kind of front. That's the way in which we go forward. Sorry if I'm not answering your question exactly.
No. It actually cuts to the core. It is the essential thing. It is what you said at the beginning of this conversation. It is the solidarity across racial lines, not solidarity with racism, but solidarity across racial lines with people who understand that Black lives matter, and that solidarity with workers. You spoke exactly to it.
I actually want to remind, here I am in Wisconsin. I don't know how much time we have left, but here I am in Wisconsin. In Wisconsin win for Obama, okay? And then it wanted Bernie Sanders. It didn't get Bernie Sanders, and we ended up with Donald Trump. The thing we have to remember is that Wisconsinites, white working class Wisconsinites, voted for Barack Obama, okay? And what happened is they got so angry at the Democratic Party, and in essence, the turning of the Democratic Party giving their backs to the heartland, as we're sometimes called, that they would have voted. They wanted radical change. Even the polls said specifically radical change. Had it been Bernie Sanders, they would have gone there. And this discussion would have been radically different, in fact. The point is that we have to recognize that the capacity to mobilize across race and ethnic and religious lines prevails. Look, whether you're native born or newly arrived in this country, we are the heirs to a promise that goes back to the revolution. However often it has been denied, the fact is the promise persists. And the fact that you and I are talking about this is a sign of just how that promise persists.
Actually, now I do remember a conversation we had previously, really at the beginning of the pandemic, after the first, I don't know, 50 or 80,000. And you wanted to make the point, and I heard the point, that in fact, we are, like, whether or not, the founding fathers were white supremacists, but they had the Constitution, and the Constitution transcends their own white supremacy. Had they known that we would use the Constitution to liberate Black people and then to liberate the globe, maybe they wouldn't have written it, but they did. Too bad, Chance. Go ahead.
Yeah. The great Frederick Douglass, who was originally a Garrisonian and would have welcomed the separation of the North and the South to keep the North free from slavery. He was taught in the middle of his abolitionist career to read the Declaration and the Constitution in a new way. And that was, it didn't matter the hand that wrote it. What mattered was the promise projected. Okay. And thus he was able to say in What to the Slave is the 4th of July, after he lambasted the denial of the freedom, to say that he still had hope because that promise was greater than anything.
Professor Harvey J. Kaye, historian, sociologist, professor emeritus of democracy and justice studies. Thank you for joining me, my friend.
Thank you, Ben. It's always great to talk to you.